Keanu Reeves sacrifices his life to save soldier from exploding tank. The battlefield was chaos. Smoke billowed into the air, mingling with the deafening sounds of artillery fire, the screams of soldiers, and the relentless roar of tank engines. Keanu Reeves, playing Captain David Reynolds, stood at the center of it all, his sharp eyes scanning the battlefield for any sign of his platoon. He had seen too much death today, and he was determined not to lose another man. "Captain," a voice called out through the din. Private Sam Carter, a young soldier barely out of training, sprinted toward him, his face pale and streaked with grime. "We're pinned down near the east flank. The tank, it's stuck in the open, and the enemy's got us surrounded." David's jaw tightened as he processed the information. The tank was critical to their mission. If they lost it, they wouldn't just lose ground, they'd lose the war. But what made his heart clench was the thought of his men, trapped and vulnerable. He couldn't let that happen. Gripping his rifle, David nodded. "Take me there." The trek to the east flank was harrowing. Bullets zipped past them, kicking up dirt and sending sparks flying off twisted metal. David moved with practiced precision, his body low to the ground as he led Sam through the maze of rubble and debris. Every step brought them closer to the sound of the tank's engine, which was sputtering and groaning as though it were alive and in pain. When they finally reached the tank, David's heart sank. It was a hulking beast of metal, scarred and battered from enemy fire. One of its treads had been blown off, leaving it immobilized in the middle of an open field. Around it, a handful of soldiers were crouched behind makeshift cover, their faces etched with fear and desperation. "Captain," Sergeant Williams, a seasoned soldier with a booming voice, called out as David approached. "We're sitting ducks out here. The enemy's got snipers on the ridge, and they've been hammering us with mortars. We've got wounded men inside the tank, and we can't get them out without exposing ourselves." David's mind raced. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. "Williams, keep the men pinned down here. Carter and I will draw their fire," David said, his voice calm but firm. "Once the snipers are focused on us, you get those men out of the tank." "Understood." Williams hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Understood, Captain. But be careful out there." David flashed him a small, reassuring smile. "Always." David and Sam moved quickly, darting from cover to cover as they worked their way toward the ridge where the enemy snipers were positioned. David's heart pounded in his chest, but his focus remained unshakable. He had been in situations like this before, too many times to count, and he knew the key to survival was keeping a cool head. As they neared the ridge, David signaled for Sam to stop. "Wait here," he whispered. "I'll draw their attention. When they're focused on me, take out as many as you can." Sam's eyes widened. "Captain, no arguments, Carter," David said firmly. "You've got this. Trust me." Sam nodded, though his hands trembled as he gripped his rifle. "Yes, sir." With that, David stepped out from cover and fired a volley of shots toward the ridge. The enemy snipers immediately returned fire, their bullets whizzing past him as he moved in a zigzag pattern to make himself a harder target. He could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins, sharpening his senses and quickening his reflexes. Sam, true to his training, took advantage of the distraction. He steadied his rifle, took aim, and fired. One by one, the snipers fell, their positions betrayed by the flashes of their muzzles. Back at the tank, Sergeant Williams and the other soldiers seized the opportunity to rescue their wounded comrades. They moved quickly and efficiently, pulling the injured men from the tank and carrying them to safety. But as they worked, a new threat emerged. The enemy, realizing they were losing the upper hand, launched a counterattack. A mortar shell exploded nearby, sending a shower of dirt and debris raining down on the soldiers. In the chaos, one of the wounded men, a young private named Ethan, was left behind, still trapped inside the tank. Williams shouted for someone to go back for him, but the enemy fire was too intense. The soldiers hesitated, torn between their duty and the very real danger of being killed. And then, like a bolt of lightning, David appeared. He sprinted toward the tank, his movements a blur of determination and bravery. He reached the hatch, wrenched it open, and found Ethan inside, barely conscious. "I've got you," David said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. He hoisted Ethan over his shoulder and began the perilous journey back to safety. The next few moments felt like an eternity. The enemy fire intensified, and David knew they wouldn't make it unless he did something drastic. As he reached the edge of the field, he saw Sam and Williams waving frantically for him to hurry. But before he could take another step, a mortar shell landed just a few feet away, its deafening explosion throwing him to the ground. Pain shot through David's body as he struggled to his feet. His ears rang, and his vision swam, but his grip on Ethan remained firm. Summoning every ounce of strength he had left, he pushed forward, shielding the young soldier with his own body. He was so close, just a few more steps. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A tank shell, hurtling toward them like a missile. There was no time to think, no time to react. In one final, heroic act, David threw Ethan toward the waiting soldiers and turned to face the shell. The explosion that followed was blinding, consuming everything in its path. When the smoke cleared, the battlefield fell silent. The enemy, stunned by the ferocity of David's sacrifice, began to retreat. Sam and Williams rushed to where David had fallen, their hearts heavy with dread. They found him lying on the ground, his uniform charred and tattered. Miraculously, he was still alive, though barely. Blood stained the dirt beneath him, and his breaths came in shallow gasps. "Captain," Sam cried, dropping to his knees beside him. "We've got you. Just hold on." David's eyes fluttered open, and he managed a weak smile. Did we save them?" Williams nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "You did, sir. You saved them all." David's smile grew faintly. "That's good." The medics arrived moments later, rushing onto the battlefield with stretchers and supplies. Captain David Reynolds lay still as they worked to stabilize him. His breaths were shallow, his face pale, but his resolve was unwavering even in his weakened state. Private Sam Carter refused to leave his side, clutching David's hand as if willing his strength into the man who had saved them all. "You're going to be okay, Captain," Sam whispered, his voice cracking. "You have to be. We need you." David gave a faint smile, his eyes fluttering open for just a moment. "A good soldier, Carter. Brave, just like Ethan." His words came slowly, each one a monumental effort. "Keep going." The medics loaded David onto a stretcher, their movements quick but careful. "We're taking him to the field hospital," one of them said. "He's critical, but we'll do everything we can." As they carried him away, the soldiers left behind watched in silence. They had all seen the sacrifice he made, throwing himself in harm's way to save Ethan and ensure their mission succeeded. It wasn't just heroism, it was something far greater. It was the embodiment of leadership, selflessness, and courage. The field hospital was a flurry of activity when David arrived. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to tend to the wounded, their faces etched with both determination and exhaustion. David was rushed into surgery, his condition so dire that even the most seasoned staff exchanged uncertain glances. Meanwhile, Sam and Sergeant Williams waited outside, pacing the muddy ground. Sam's hands were trembling, his mind replaying the explosion over and over. "It should have been me," Sam muttered under his breath. "I should have been the one to take the hit." Williams stopped pacing and placed a firm hand on Sam's shoulder. "Don't you dare think that, Carter. The captain made a choice because he believed in you, and in all of us. You honor that by carrying on." Sam nodded, though the weight of guilt still pressed heavily on his chest. He clenched his fists, silently vowing to make Captain Reynolds proud no matter what. Hours passed before the doctor emerged from the operating room, his expression grave. "He's stable for now, but the injuries are severe," he said. "The next 24 hours will be critical. Can we see him?" Williams asked. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "One at a time. But don't stay too long. He needs rest." Sam was the first to step inside. The sight of David hooked up to machines, his body battered and broken, was almost too much to bear. But Sam forced himself to stay strong. "Hey, Captain," he said softly, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "It's me, Carter. I wanted to say thank you. For everything." David's eyes opened just a fraction, and he gave the faintest nod. "You did good out there," he murmured. Proud of you? Tears welled in Sam's eyes, but he blinked them away. I won't let you down, sir. I promise. News of David's heroism spread quickly, both within the battalion and beyond. Soldiers who had never met him spoke of his bravery, and commanders praised his leadership. But the ones who knew him best, his platoon, felt the weight of his sacrifice most deeply. Ethan, the young private David had saved, was racked with guilt. He sat alone in the mess tent, his food untouched, his hands trembling. If it weren't for me, he wouldn't be in that hospital, Ethan said when Sam found him there. Stop that, Sam replied, sitting down across from him. The captain didn't save you because he had to, he saved you because he wanted to. That's the kind of man he is. Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with uncertainty. Do you think he'll make it? Sam hesitated, then nodded firmly. He's the toughest guy I've ever met. If anyone can pull through, it's him. Days turned into weeks, and David's condition slowly improved. The doctors marveled at his resilience, calling it nothing short of a miracle. By the time he was strong enough to sit up in bed, visitors from across the battalion came to see him, each one eager to express their gratitude. But for David, the greatest reward was knowing his men were safe. When Williams and Sam updated him on the platoon's progress, he listened intently, offering advice and encouragement despite his weakened state. You're ready, Carter, David said one afternoon as Sam sat beside him. You've got what it takes to lead. Sam's eyes widened. Me? Led? David nodded. You've proven yourself. You're brave, resourceful, and you care about your team. That's what matters. As the weeks passed, David's recovery continued. Though his injuries meant he would never return to active duty, his spirit remained unbroken. He was transferred to a military base stateside, where he took on a new role as an instructor, sharing his knowledge and experience with the next generation of soldiers. Sam, meanwhile, stepped into the leadership role David had entrusted to him. It wasn't easy, there were moments of doubt, fear, and second-guessing, but every time he felt unsure, he remembered the captain's words, "You've got this. Trust yourself." Ethan, too, found a renewed sense of purpose. He worked tirelessly to improve his skills, determined to live up to the sacrifice David had made for him. He even wrote a letter to David, expressing his gratitude and promising to carry forward the lessons he had learned. Years later, at a reunion for veterans of their battalion, David walked into the room to a standing ovation. Though he moved with a slight limp, his presence was as commanding as ever. Soldiers lined up to shake his hand, each one eager to share how his leadership had shaped their lives. When he reached Sam and Ethan, he smiled warmly. "Look at you two," he said. "Leaders in your own right." "We had the best teacher," Sam replied, his voice filled with emotion. As the night went on, the men shared stories, laughter, and memories of their time on the battlefield. But through it all, one truth remained clear. Captain David Reynolds had not just saved lives, he had changed them forever. The reunion carried on into the evening, the air alive with camaraderie and a shared understanding of the sacrifices they had all made. For many, it was the first time they'd seen each other in years. Stories of bravery, hardship, and bittersweet victories were shared around the room. But no story stood taller than Captain David Reynolds, the man who had risked everything to save one of his own. David moved through the crowd slowly, his limp a subtle reminder of the moment that had forever changed him. Yet, he carried himself with quiet pride, his every step a testament to resilience. Veterans and their families surrounded him, some shaking his hand, others offering hugs. Even soldiers who had never served directly under him approached, eager to meet the man whose reputation had grown to legendary proportions. Captain Reynolds, a young soldier said, her voice filled with awe. "It's an honor to meet you. Your story, your sacrifice, it's the reason I enlisted." David paused, his face softening. "The honor's mine. But remember, it's not about sacrifice, it's about what we stand for. Every one of us can make a difference." The soldier nodded, her admiration evident. "Thank you, sir. I'll remember that." Meanwhile, Sam and Ethan stood near the back of the room, watching David with a mix of pride and reverence. For them, he wasn't just a hero, he was family. Over the years, their bond had grown deeper, forged in the fires of combat and tempered by shared struggles. You know, Ethan said, breaking the silence, sometimes I still think about that day. About how close we were to losing him. Sam nodded, his gaze fixed on David. Me too. But look at him now, still inspiring people, still making an impact. That's what makes him who he is. Ethan smiled faintly. He believed in us when we didn't even believe in ourselves. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay that. You already have, Sam said. By becoming the soldier he knew you could be. As the night wore on, the crowd began to thin, leaving only a handful of people gathered around David. Sam and Ethan eventually made their way over, eager to spend some time with the man who had shaped their lives. Captain, Sam said with a grin, clapping David on the shoulder. You're still the star of the show. David chuckled, shaking his head. I'm just glad to see everyone here. It's good to know we've all found our way. Ethan stepped forward, his expression earnest. Sir, there's something I've been meaning to say for a long time. Thank you, for everything. You didn't just save my life that day. You gave me a second chance, and I've done my best to make it count. David's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You don't owe me anything, Ethan. What you've done with that second chance, that's your repayment. And I couldn't be prouder. In the weeks following the reunion, David returned to his work as an instructor at the military base. Though his days of active duty were behind him, he found immense fulfillment in mentoring young soldiers. He shared not only his tactical knowledge but also the values that had guided him throughout his career: integrity, courage, and unwavering commitment to one's team. One of his students, a bright and ambitious cadet named Leah Torres, quickly stood out. She reminded David of a younger version of himself, driven, resourceful, and fiercely loyal. Over time, David became a mentor to Leah, helping her navigate the challenges of military life. Captain, Leah said one afternoon as they reviewed battle strategies in his office, how do you stay so grounded after everything you've been through? David leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. It's not always easy, but I've learned that no matter how dark things get, there's always a reason to keep going. For me, it's the people I've served with, the ones who became family. They're the reason I do what I do. Leah nodded, her respect for him growing with every word. I hope I can make that kind of impact one day. You will, David said with a smile. I have no doubt. Meanwhile, Sam and Ethan continued to make waves in their own right. Sam had risen through the ranks to become a platoon leader, earning the respect of his peers and subordinates alike. His leadership style, modeled after David's, emphasized teamwork and mutual respect. Ethan, now a seasoned soldier, had taken on a mentorship role of his own, guiding new recruits and sharing the lessons he had learned. His story of survival and redemption became a source of inspiration, reminding others that even in the face of adversity, there was always a path forward. The two men remained close, often reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. Do you ever think about what life would have been like if we hadn't met the captain? Ethan asked one evening as they sat around a campfire during a training exercise. All the time, Sam replied. But honestly, I can't imagine it. He didn't just save us, he shaped us. And I think it's our job to carry that forward. Ethan nodded, a determined look in his eyes. Then let's make sure we do. As the years went by, David's legacy continued to grow. His story was taught in military academies, his name becoming synonymous with heroism and selflessness. But for David, the accolades were secondary. What mattered most to him were the lives he had touched and the bonds he had forged. One day, as he walked through the halls of the military base, he was approached by a young recruit. Captain Reynolds? The recruit asked, his voice tentative. David turned, offering a warm smile. That's me. What can I do for you? I just wanted to say thank you, the recruit said, his words tumbling out in a rush. I grew up hearing about you, about how you saved your men and never gave up. You're the reason I decided to join. I want to be the kind of leader you are. David's smile grew, and he extended his hand. Then you're already on the right path. Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about showing up, giving your all, and never forgetting the people who depend on you. Back home, David maintained a quiet life, often reflecting on the journey that had brought him to where he was. He spent his days gardening, writing, and staying in touch with the soldiers who had become like family to him. Though his body bore the scars of war, his heart remained full, sustained by the knowledge that he had made a difference. One afternoon, as he sat on his porch watching the sunset, he received a call from Sam. "Captain," Sam said, his voice filled with excitement. "Ethan and I are putting together a team to work on a new leadership program for recruits. We want you to be a part of it." David's eyes lit up. "I'd be honored. What's the plan?" "We're calling it the Reynolds Initiative," Sam said. "It's all about teaching the values you've always stood for: courage, integrity, and putting the team first." David chuckled, a mix of pride and humility in his tone. "You two never cease to amaze me. Let's do it." The Reynolds Initiative became a resounding success, shaping the next generation of soldiers and instilling in them the principles that had defined David's career. Through it all, David remained at the heart of the program, sharing his wisdom and reminding everyone he met that true leadership was about service, not glory. And as he watched the recruits take their oaths, ready to embark on their own journeys, David felt a profound sense of fulfillment. His sacrifice had not been in vain. It had sparked a ripple effect that would endure for generations. The Reynolds Initiative gained momentum quickly, expanding beyond military bases to schools, community centers, and leadership seminars worldwide. Its mission wasn't just to train soldiers but to cultivate a universal understanding of leadership as service, something Captain David Reynolds had lived by every day of his career. David himself became a sought-after speaker. Invitations poured in from universities, international organizations, and even governments asking him to share his story and the principles behind the initiative. Though public speaking wasn't something David had ever sought, he accepted with humility, knowing the impact it could have. One evening, he stood in the grand auditorium of a prestigious university, addressing a crowd of students, faculty, and dignitaries. The room was packed, with people even standing along the walls to catch a glimpse of the legendary soldier. David, dressed in a simple suit, approached the podium with calm confidence. "Good evening," he began, his deep voice commanding the room. "When I was a young officer, I believed leadership was about strength, about being the fastest, the smartest, the most capable. But over the years, I learned that true leadership isn't about what you can do, it's about what you can inspire others to do." He paused, scanning the crowd, his words sinking in. "On the battlefield, I saw bravery that defied logic, sacrifice that went beyond reason. Not because I gave orders, but because we believed in each other. Leadership isn't about being in front, it's about being beside your people. It's about trust, respect, and love." The audience sat in rapt silence, hanging on his every word. As David continued, he shared stories from his service, moments of triumph and heartbreak, lessons learned through pain and perseverance. By the time he finished, the room erupted into applause, a standing ovation that lasted minutes. Back home, the work of the Reynolds Initiative continued to grow. Sam and Ethan, now co-directors of the program, worked tirelessly to expand its reach. They traveled to underprivileged communities, partnering with local leaders to implement leadership workshops and mentorship programs. For them, it was more than a job. It was a calling, a way to honor the man who had shaped their lives. One day, as they prepared for a new training session, Sam turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what the captain's life would have been like if he hadn't been injured? If he'd stayed in active duty?" Ethan nodded, his gaze distant. "Sometimes. But then I think about everything he's done since, everything we've done because of him. Maybe this was how it was meant to be." Sam smiled faintly. "Yeah." He turned his pain into purpose. "That's something not everyone can do." Meanwhile, David found joy in the quieter moments of life. He had moved to a small town surrounded by nature, where he spent his mornings tending to his garden and his evenings writing. Over the years, he had kept journals filled with reflections on leadership, sacrifice, and the bond between soldiers. At Sam's insistence, he decided to compile those writings into a book. The process was both cathartic and challenging. As David revisited old memories, he found himself reliving the highs and lows of his career. But with each chapter, he realized just how far he, and those he had served with, had come. The book, titled beside them, A Leader's Journey, became an instant bestseller. Readers from all walks of life found inspiration in David's words, from young leaders in corporate offices to teachers, nurses, and activists. The book's central message, that leadership was about service and connection, resonated deeply in a world hungry for authenticity. Months after the book's release, David received an invitation that would change his life once again. The United Nations, impressed by the impact of the Reynolds Initiative, asked him to accept the Global Humanitarian Leadership Award at their annual summit. It was an honor few could dream of, and David, though humbled, hesitated at first. "I'm just a soldier," he told Sam during one of their weekly phone calls. "I didn't do this for recognition." Sam laughed. "You're more than a soldier, Captain. You're a teacher, a mentor, a hero. This isn't just about you, it's about what you stand for." Ethan chimed in, his voice full of conviction. "You've always said leadership is about inspiring others. This award is proof that you've done just that. You need to accept it, for all of us." The summit was held in Geneva, Switzerland, in a grand hall that exuded history and importance. David, wearing his finest suit, stood backstage, his hands clasped in front of him. He could hear the applause as the previous speaker finished, and the announcer's voice boomed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce a man whose bravery, resilience, and dedication to service have inspired people around the world. Please join me in welcoming Captain David Reynolds, recipient of the Global Humanitarian Leadership Award." David stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. As he approached the podium, he took a deep breath, his heart steady despite the enormity of the moment. "Thank you," he began, his voice calm but powerful. "This award is not just a recognition of my work, it's a recognition of everyone who has walked this journey with me. My platoon, who taught me the true meaning of courage. My mentors, who showed me the power of guidance. And the countless individuals who've carried forward the lessons we've learned together." He paused, his gaze sweeping the audience. Leadership isn't about awards or titles. It's about showing up even when it's hard. It's about standing beside the people who depend on you and lifting them up when they falter. That's what I've tried to do in my life, and it's what I'll continue to do. The applause that followed was deafening, a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very walls of the hall. David bowed his head in gratitude, his heart full. In the years that followed, the Reynolds Initiative continued to thrive, its impact felt in communities across the globe. David remained its guiding light, though he often worked behind the scenes, letting Sam, Ethan, and Leah take the lead. One of the most significant milestones came when the initiative launched its first International Leadership Summit, bringing together participants from every continent. The event, held in Nairobi, was a celebration of diversity, collaboration, and the shared goal of building a better world. David, now in his 70s, attended as an honored guest. Though his body showed the signs of age, his spirit remained as vibrant as ever. As he watched the next generation of leaders share their ideas and aspirations, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. "This is your legacy, Captain," Sam said, sitting beside him during a quiet moment. "You've built something that will outlast all of us." David smiled, his eyes shining with pride. "No, Sam. We've built it. Together." In the twilight of his life, David found peace in knowing that his story had come full circle. The young soldier who had once stood on the battlefield, determined to save his men, had become a symbol of hope and resilience. His sacrifices had sparked a movement, one that would continue to inspire generations long after he was gone. And as he sat on his porch one final time, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he whispered a simple truth to the wind: leadership isn't about being remembered. It's about making sure others never forget what's possible. After the resounding success of the Reynolds Initiative's Global Summit, the program entered a new phase of evolution. The vision of cultivating leaders who valued service, integrity, and resilience expanded into other domains beyond military and humanitarian sectors. Schools, businesses, governments, and nonprofit organizations began integrating the Reynolds principles into their leadership training programs. For David Reynolds, this growth was deeply fulfilling, though he remained modest about his contributions. He spent most of his time at his quiet home in the countryside, staying connected with the initiative and his men's through letters and video calls. Despite his age, he continued to write, filling notebooks with reflections, ideas, and letters to the future. One day, David received an unexpected visitor at his home. Leah Torres, now a captain herself and one of the brightest stars to emerge from the initiative, arrived with an envelope in hand. "Captain Reynolds," Leah said as she stepped onto his porch, her face lit with excitement. "I have something to share with you." David set down the book he'd been reading and smiled. "Leah, what a surprise. Come on in." They sat together at the kitchen table, and Leah handed him the envelope. "The initiative's board of directors wanted you to see this first." David opened the envelope carefully, his hands trembling slightly from age. Inside was a letter detailing plans for a new facility, the David Reynolds Center for Leadership and Service. The center would serve as a global hub for leadership development, bringing together people from all walks of life to learn, collaborate, and create solutions for the world's challenges. David stared at the letter for a long moment, his emotions a mix of surprise, pride, and gratitude. This is incredible," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "But it's not just about me. It's about everyone who's been part of this journey." Leah nodded. "And that's exactly why it should bear your name. You've inspired all of us, Captain. This center is a way to carry your legacy forward." Construction of the David Reynolds Center began soon after, with Leah and a team of passionate leaders spearheading the project. The center was designed to embody the values David had championed throughout his life. It featured classrooms, workshops, and spaces for collaboration, all centered around a large courtyard with a memorial dedicated to the sacrifices of soldiers and leaders who had come before. When the center was completed 2 years later, it stood as a beacon of hope and progress. The grand opening ceremony was attended by dignitaries, leaders, and students from around the world. David, now in his 80s, was flown in as the guest of honor. As he approached the podium to deliver his speech, the crowd erupted into applause. Many in attendance had been directly or indirectly touched by his story, and their admiration was palpable. David took a deep breath, steadying himself as he began to speak. "When I look at this center, I don't see bricks and mortar. I see people who believe in the power of service, in the strength of community, and in the possibility of a better world. This center isn't about me. It's about us. It's about what we can achieve when we stand together." He paused, his voice growing softer but no less powerful. "Leadership isn't about commanding others. It's about lifting them up. It's about finding strength in vulnerability, courage in uncertainty, and hope in the face of despair. That's what this center represents. And I'm proud to know that its work will continue long after I'm gone." The crowd rose to its feet, their applause carrying a sense of unity and purpose that resonated deeply. David stepped back from the podium, his heart full, knowing he had passed the torch to a new generation. Over the next decade, the David Reynolds Center became a hub for changemakers from around the globe. Programs were developed to address pressing issues such as climate change, social inequality, and education reform. Graduates of the center went on to lead initiatives that transformed communities and inspired others to join the movement. Leah, now the center's director, often reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She kept in touch with David regularly, visiting him whenever she could and sharing updates on the center's progress. During one visit, she brought along a group of students who had recently completed the program. They were eager to meet the man whose story had inspired them. "Captain Reynolds," one of the students said, his voice filled with admiration, "I just want to thank you. Your story taught me that leadership isn't about being perfect, it's about being human. I used to think I wasn't cut out to lead, but now I see that it's not about me. It's about what I can do for others." David smiled, his eyes shining with pride. "You've got it exactly right. Leadership is a journey, not a destination. And as long as you keep walking that path, you'll make a difference." In the final years of his life, David found peace in knowing that his work had taken on a life of its own. The Reynolds Initiative and the center continued to thrive, their impact rippling across generations and borders. Sam, Ethan, and Leah carried forward his legacy with unwavering dedication, ensuring that the values he had lived by would never be forgotten. One crisp autumn morning, David passed away peacefully in his sleep. News of his death spread quickly, and tributes poured in from around the world. Soldiers, leaders, students, and everyday people shared stories of how he had touched their lives, each one a testament to the man he had been. At his memorial service, held at the David Reynolds Center, thousands gathered to pay their respects. Leah, Sam, and Ethan stood together at the podium, their voices steady despite the weight of their grief. Captain Reynolds was more than a leader, Leah said, her voice carrying through the hall. He was a teacher, a mentor, and a friend. He taught us that leadership is about service, about standing beside the people who need us most. And though he's no longer with us, his spirit lives on in every life he touched. Sam stepped forward next, his voice filled with emotion. The captain once told me that leadership isn't about being remembered, it's about making sure others never forget what's possible. Well, Captain, I promise you this, we'll never forget. Years later, a plaque was installed at the center, bearing David's words, "Leadership isn't about being in front, it's about being beside. Together, we can achieve the impossible." As students and leaders passed by the plaque each day, they felt a renewed sense of purpose, inspired by the legacy of a man who had turned sacrifice into hope, pain into progress, and a single act of bravery into a movement that would endure for generations. As the David Reynolds Center continued to flourish, its impact grew even further. Leaders from every corner of the world sought to attend its programs, and its graduates became known for their exceptional ability to inspire change. From impoverished villages to corporate boardrooms, the principles that David Reynolds had championed transformed the way people viewed leadership. Leah Torres, now a seasoned leader in her own right, spent her days running the center with the same vision and integrity that David had instilled in her. But even as the center thrived, she often found herself thinking about the man who had made it all possible. One day, while going through old files in the center's archives, Leah stumbled upon a collection of letters written by David during his recovery after the explosion. They were addressed to his platoon, his mentors, and even his younger self. The letters were raw, honest, and filled with the wisdom that only someone who had truly lived through the highs and lows of life could impart. Leah decided to compile the letters into a book, believing that they could serve as a guide for future generations. With the approval of Sam, Ethan, and the rest of the initiative's leadership, she worked tirelessly to organize and edit the letters, ensuring that David's voice shone through in every word. When the book, titled Letters from Beside the Fire, The Reflections of Captain David Reynolds, was released, it became an instant phenomenon. People from all walks of life found solace and inspiration in David's words, which spoke to the universal struggles of leadership, resilience, and finding purpose. To the soldier who doubts themselves, it began. "I know how you feel. I've been there too, standing in the midst of chaos, questioning whether I was strong enough, smart enough, or brave enough to lead. But here's what I've learned. Leadership isn't about being fearless. It's about feeling the fear and stepping forward anyway. It's about showing up, not because you're certain of the outcome, but because the people beside you need you. So, take a deep breath. Trust yourself. And remember, you're never alone." Leah often read that letter to new recruits at the center, her voice steady as she conveyed the message that had defined David's life. She saw the way their eyes lit up, the way their postures straightened, as if they had been given permission to believe in themselves for the first time. Meanwhile, Sam and Ethan continued their work with the Reynolds Initiative, expanding its programs to include initiatives for youth empowerment, conflict resolution, and disaster relief. They frequently traveled to remote regions, bringing leadership training to communities that had been overlooked for far too long. During one such trip to a small village recovering from a devastating flood, Sam and Ethan met a group of teenagers who had taken it upon themselves to organize relief efforts. They were young, inexperienced, and overwhelmed, but their determination was undeniable. "Captain Reynolds would have loved these kids," Sam said to Ethan as they watched the teenagers distribute supplies and rebuild homes. "They remind me of us when we started out, unsure of what we were doing, but willing to try." Ethan smiled. "Let's make sure they have the support they need." "It's what he would have wanted." Sam nodded, and together, They spent weeks working with the teenagers, sharing the lessons they had learned from David and helping them build a foundation for long-term recovery. By the time they left, the teenagers were not only more confident in their abilities but also inspired to continue leading their community. Back at the center, Leah received word that the United Nations wanted to partner with the Reynolds Initiative to launch a global leadership fellowship. The fellowship would select promising individuals from underserved communities and provide them with the training, resources, and mentorship needed to become leaders in their fields. When Leah shared the news with Sam and Ethan, they immediately thought of David. "We need to dedicate this fellowship to him," Ethan said. "It's the perfect way to honor everything he stood for." Leah agreed, and the fellowship was named the Captain David Reynolds Global Leadership Fellowship. The inaugural class of fellows included 50 individuals from 30 different countries, each one chosen for their potential to create meaningful change. During the fellowship's opening ceremony, Leah spoke about David's legacy. "Captain Reynolds taught us that leadership isn't about standing above others, it's about standing beside them. This fellowship is about carrying that legacy forward, about empowering leaders who will stand beside their communities and lift them up." The fellows were deeply moved, many of them later sharing how David's story had inspired them to pursue leadership in the first place. As the years went by, the Reynolds Initiative became a household name, synonymous with ethical and compassionate leadership. Its programs expanded to include virtual training sessions, making its teachings accessible to millions around the world. Graduates of the initiative formed a tight-knit global network, supporting each other as they tackled some of the world's most pressing challenges. Leah, Sam, and Ethan continued to guide the initiative, though they often found themselves reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. One evening, as they sat around a table at the center's annual retreat, Sam raised a glass in a quiet toast. "To Captain Reynolds," he said, "the man who showed us what it means to lead and to live." Ethan and Leah echoed the toast, their faces filled with gratitude. In the twilight of their own careers, the three leaders decided to pass the torch to the next generation. Leah, Sam, and Ethan handpicked a group of promising leaders to take over the initiative, ensuring that its mission would continue long after they stepped away. Their final act as leaders of the initiative was to establish a permanent memorial at the David Reynolds Center. The memorial, titled The Wall of Service, featured the names of every individual who had contributed to the initiative's success, including David's platoon, the early mentors, and the countless graduates who had carried its principles into the world. At the center of the wall was an inscription that read, "Together, we are stronger. Together, we are unstoppable." As the years turned into decades, the story of Captain David Reynolds became a legend, passed down through the generations. His sacrifice on the battlefield and his dedication to building a better world continued to inspire people from all walks of life. Though David was no longer there to see it, his legacy lived on in the actions of those who had been touched by his story. And in the hearts of everyone who believed in the power of standing beside others, his spirit burned brightly, a guiding light for all who dared to lead. The decades rolled by, but the impact of the David Reynolds Center and the Reynolds Initiative only grew stronger. The global network of graduates, now spanning more than 100 countries, became a force for positive change, tackling challenges from poverty and inequality to environmental conservation and global peacekeeping. At the heart of it all, the principles Captain David Reynolds had stood for remained unshaken. His life and legacy were taught as part of leadership courses, not just in military academies but also in schools, universities, and corporate leadership programs worldwide. The story of his selfless act to save Private Ethan and his transformation into a beacon of leadership was immortalized in books, documentaries, and even a widely celebrated film. The film, aptly titled Beside Them, captured David's journey in a way that resonated deeply with audiences. It depicted the young captain navigating the harrowing challenges of war, the sacrifices he made for his men, and the legacy he built afterward. The film was a global sensation, winning critical acclaim and inspiring millions. One of those inspired by the film was a young girl named Amelia from a small village in Kenya. Amelia's family struggled to make ends meet, and opportunities for education were scarce. But Amelia was determined to make a difference, even in her small community. After watching Beside Them, She felt an unshakable connection to David's story. If he could do so much with so little, she told herself, why can't I? Amelia began organizing small community cleanups, encouraging her neighbors to work together to improve their environment. Her efforts soon grew into larger projects, from building a small library to creating a food-sharing network for struggling families. Her work caught the attention of the Captain David Reynolds Global Leadership Fellowship, which offered her a place in their program. For Amelia, it was a dream come true. She traveled to the Reynolds Center, where she joined fellows from around the world in an intensive leadership training program. Amelia thrived in the program, soaking up every lesson and applying it to her vision for her village. At the end of the fellowship, she presented her plan to build a sustainable community center that would serve as a hub for education, healthcare, and economic development. The plan was met with overwhelming support, and Amelia returned home with the resources and knowledge to make it a reality. Amelia's story was just one of thousands. Across the globe, graduates of the Reynolds Initiative were making an indelible mark on their communities. Each one carried forward David's belief that leadership was about standing beside others, lifting them up, and working together to create change. At the David Reynolds Center, Leah Torres, now retired, often visited to see the new faces of the program. Though she no longer ran the center, she remained deeply connected to its mission. One day, as she walked through the bustling halls, she stopped by the wall of service. Her fingers brushed against the inscription at its center, "Together, we are stronger. Together, we are unstoppable." Tears welled in her eyes as she thought of David. "We did it, Captain," she whispered. "We kept your promise." Sam and Ethan, also retired, had settled into quieter lives but remained active mentors to the initiative's alumni. They traveled occasionally to attend graduations and events, always quick to remind others of the man who had started it all. At one such event, Sam stood before a room filled with graduates, many of whom had traveled thousands of miles to be there. The energy in the room was electric, a palpable sense of hope and determination. Captain Reynolds used to say that leadership is a journey, not a destination, Sam began, his voice steady but emotional. And looking at all of you, I know the journey is far from over. You are the ones who will carry this forward. You are the ones who will stand beside those who need you, just as he stood beside us. The room erupted into applause, a tribute not only to Sam's words but also to the legacy they all shared. As the initiative prepared to celebrate its 50th anniversary, plans for a massive global summit were underway. The event would bring together alumni, current fellows, and leaders from every sector to discuss the future of leadership in an ever-changing world. The summit was held in Nairobi, a fitting location given its connection to Amelia and countless other alumni from Africa who had gone on to create transformative change. The city buzzed with excitement as attendees arrived, each carrying stories of their journeys and the impact of the initiative. The opening ceremony featured speeches from world leaders, renowned alumni, and even a recorded message from the Secretary General of the United Nations. But the highlight of the evening was a holographic presentation of Captain David Reynolds' most famous speech, recreated using his writings and recordings. The audience watched in awe as the hologram of David spoke, his words as powerful as ever. Leadership isn't about being remembered. It's about ensuring that others never forget what's possible. It's about standing beside those who need you, not because you have to, but because you choose to. And when you do, you'll find that together, there's nothing we can't achieve. Tears streamed down faces, and applause thundered through the hall as the hologram faded. Even in death, David's presence was undeniable, his words a rallying cry for the next generation of leaders. The summit concluded with the unveiling of a new initiative, the Global Leadership Resilience Fund, designed to provide immediate support to communities facing crises. Whether it was natural disasters, conflicts, or pandemics, the fund would mobilize resources and leaders trained in the Reynolds principles to respond effectively. Leah, Sam, and Ethan, though retired, were invited to the stage to cut the ribbon. The three stood side by side, their hearts full as they looked out at the sea of faces representing everything David had worked for. As they cut the ribbon, Sam leaned over and whispered, "This is what he would have wanted." Leah smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "It's more than he could have dreamed," Back in David's hometown, his modest grave became a place of pilgrimage for those inspired by his story. Though he had never sought fame, his legacy was undeniable. Visitors left flowers, letters, and tokens of gratitude, each one a testament to the lives he had touched. One letter, written by a young girl who had just completed the Reynolds Fellowship, summed up what so many felt. "Dear Captain Reynolds, I never met you, but you've changed my life. Because of you, I know that leadership isn't about power, it's about people. Thank you for showing us the way. I promise to carry your torch forward." As the sun set on another day at the David Reynolds Center, the courtyard filled with the laughter of students and the hum of conversations about dreams and possibilities. The plaque at the center of the courtyard, etched with David's words, gleamed in the fading light. "Together, we are stronger. Together, we are unstoppable." David's story had become more than a legacy. It had become a movement, one that would continue to shape the world for generations to come.